One of the things that has been talked about over the last couple of years, especially during some of what we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, was the skyrocketing costs of home ownership. And that's especially an issue when you're talking about younger folks, people in their 20s and 30s. I'm excited to welcome to our program this morning Tyler Curtis. He is a commentator over at Young Voices, and he's got an article over at the USA Today talking a little bit about this. Tyler, good morning to you. Appreciate the time, and let's go through your op-ed and what exactly you're noticing across the country.
Well, sure. Thanks for having me on. I think everybody's kind of seeing it over the past couple of years. We've seen record high inflation rates. Rates we haven't seen in 40 years. And that's affected everything from grocery bills to even to home prices. Now, home prices are a little bit unique. Of course, real estate values have been going up and have always continued to go up. But they've gone up a much faster rate than they have, I think, at any time in American history. And that's affected people in a lot of different ways, especially young people who don't really have a lot of wealth to begin with and are finding themselves priced out of the housing market.
Yeah, and as you talk about the increase in the cost of home ownership, obviously interest rates are literally at record highs, as you note, and the cost of real estate is going up and up. You're seeing a lot more apartments and duplexes and other things. Single-family home ownership continues to skyrocket. What exactly are some of the factors that are behind that, Tyler?
Yeah, well, I see three major factors. One is local regulations that just make it more expensive to construct new housing. The population keeps going up, but the supply of housing doesn't rise to meet it. Supply and demand, you can't escape it, so prices go up as a result of that. And the second thing is inflation itself. So, the government increased the money supply, pumped trillions of dollars in new spending into the economy. That raises demand too. And so, again, when supply isn't rising to meet that demand, prices go up. And we're talking about prices not just of existing homes, but the price to construct new homes. So if lumber and concrete and other things that you need to build new homes, the prices of that go up, and the prices of new homes are going to go up as well. And then the third thing is actually an indirect effect of inflation. I think that's something that policymakers didn't really think about during the pandemic. So when the pandemic started, Federal Reserve dropped interest rates like a rock. Everybody rushed to refinance their homes, so people were getting interest rates at 3%, sometimes well below 3%, into the mid-2s. And now that interest rates are much higher, in order to fight inflation, people feel stuck with those low interest rate loans that they have. So we're seeing a really restricted supply of housing right now, because people that would otherwise like to move feel like they can't, because it would be a bad financial decision to trade their 3% interest rate for a rate that they'd have to pay now 6 to 7%.
Yeah, they're seeing that, and also when you look at these rising costs, somebody might go on a website like Zillow and say, "Oh my gosh, my house is worth an extra $100,000 than I paid for it, or $150,000." But with the cost of everything else going up, it's kind of almost a fake number, Tyler, because you could sell it, but you're not going to be able to move into anything else because the whole rest of the market is so inflated.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you think you're about taking a different job somewhere else, I've got all this equity in my house, but housing prices have gone up. I think the median sales price for a house in the United States over the past couple of years has gone up about $200,000. So, sure, you can definitely sell your house and make a decent profit, but you're going to have to turn right around and buy an even more expensive house, and guess what? You'll have to pay a higher interest rate.
Yeah, or move into an apartment and pay exorbitant rents that we're seeing all across the nation. Now, your article specifically highlights millennials, folks in their 20s and 30s. It's especially tough for them, is it not?
Yeah, and the big thing for younger people, it's tough on everybody. Housing prices affect everybody, but for younger people, it's especially difficult because they're the ones that start out with less wealth. Now, I'm not someone that sees that as inherently unfair. Obviously, people in their 40s and 50s and 60s, they worked all their lives to get to the point where they are today. But I do think it's important to point out with millennials and Gen Z, they start out with no wealth at all. In fact, they usually start out with negative wealth with all the student debt that they tend to accumulate. So when you start out with no wealth and lower wages, you're just beginning your career in your 20s. So your salary is just not going to be as big as it's going to be later on in life. So you go out and you try to buy a house, but you discover that it's a lot more expensive than you thought. I mean, you're going to need a few $1,000s at least for closing costs if the seller doesn't agree to pay them for you. And in the seller's market, it's going to be difficult to get a seller to agree to pay all those fees for you. And the second thing is you're just not going to have the savings built up for a down payment. So you're talking about a housing market that the median sales price may have been $300,000 a couple years ago, and now it's $500,000. That the amount of the increase in the required down payment is going to be huge, and it's going to price a lot of people out of the housing market.
We're joined this morning by Tyler Curtis. He is a commentator over at Young Voices. We're talking about home ownership and how that's become a little bit more complicated for some folks. Tyler, I think there is one thing here that a lot of folks overlook, and they might look at some of these articles like yours and others about the costs of homes and say, well, see, there's no point, right? There's no point of trying to do anything. It's the whole system is rigged against me. And I see a lot of people my age bracket in their mid-20s that are driving around nice cars with probably $700 or $800 a month car payments, new phones, vacations all the time. And these are the folks complaining that they can't get ahead and can't buy a house. Some of this is sacrifice, is it not?
Absolutely. There is an expectation in the 21st century that things should just always continue to get better. And I have that expectation too. But it's important to have historical perspective. When my grandparents were growing up, they had their first home was a 2-bed, 1-bath house that they, if you adjust for inflation, it's probably just as expensive as the same house would be today. So yeah, it is. I don't want to discourage anybody. If there are any millennials listening to this, any young people listening, it's certainly not impossible for you to buy a house. It may be more difficult than it was in, say, 2019, but it's probably easier still than it was in the 1980s, when interest rates were double digits. And I talked to a lot of people who grew up in the 1980s, and they remember their parents having mortgage rates that were 15 to 18%. So certainly don't want to discourage anybody. If you still work hard, you can definitely afford a home.
Well, I think that's the key to this is, there's sacrifice in anything that we do. And for a lot of folks, they're unwilling, at least what I see, Tyler, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but I see a lot of folks that are unwilling to make those sacrifices, cut the expensive car payment out, drive some $2,000 piece of junk that they found on Facebook and stockpile cash for a down payment, yet they just automatically assume that they should be allowed to buy a house with having to put no effort or no sacrifice in. I think that's a serious problem in our generation.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the Bush administration, even to the Clinton administration, where politicians made it seem like owning a home was a right rather than a privilege. The government did everything. Government did everything they could to try to make sure people could afford one because it was part of the American dream. And I agree, it is part of the American dream. But a lot of what the government has done over the past few decades to try to encourage homeownership have really had the opposite effect.
Tyler Curtis joins us this morning. Tyler, before we let you go, you got any tips for folks that are maybe in their mid-20s, early 30s that might be reading some of this, seeing some of this, things that they can do to maybe give themselves an upper hand against their companions?
Yeah, well, the first thing would be to come up with a plan. Understand the costs and the impediments that might be in your way. Make sure that you're going to work every day. Put aside money for savings, and just recognize the amount that you're going to need in order to achieve your financial goals.
Well, the name of the story is Buying a Home Was a Dream for Millennials Like Me. For many, it won't be possible. It's over at USA Today. Tyler Curtis is the author. We'll put it up on our 107.9 and 980 The Wave Facebook and Twitter accounts. Tyler, it was great to get connected with you. Great article, and hopefully we can catch up again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Tyler Curtis joining us here this morning.